Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what specifically contributes the most to injury risk on deadlifts. And this is stuff that gets misunderstood a lot, and it's something a lot of people come in who are noobs about deadlifting themselves, and they'll try to say, hey, I think your form's going to get you hurt or whatever. And again, they mean well, but they clearly don't understand the mechanisms by which people get injured on the deadlift. And our two biggest concerns on the deadlift are going to be bicep tears and lower back injuries, because those are your most common. I'm not saying people don't occasionally get hamstring tears and things like that, but the overwhelming majority of deadlift injuries are lower back injuries and bicep tears, and we need to cover that in a little bit of detail. Now, the reasons you see most often for bicep tears are twofold in nature. Number one, people train their biceps incorrectly. And I don't just mean from a bodybuilding perspective. We could argue that full range of motion on any exercise is the best way to build overall hypertrophy. But you see a lot of people who are in bodybuilding who do partials on their biceps. Well, if you're going to be a heavy deadlifter and you're going to use a mixed grip, and you will invariably need to if you want to get legitimately strong and not have to rely on straps and things, you're going to use a mixed grip. Well, if you do partials on your biceps and you skip the lockout at the bottom, or you don't do chin-ups from a dead hang, and again, all this work where people are not training the biceps to be able to handle a load when the elbow is fully locked out, and again, something you see all the time in gyms. In fact, I'm going to rip on Kenobi for that later, because he was doing that and he's trying to learn to deadlift again. That'll get its own video. Skipping the full extension of the arm at the bottom of any sort of curl and not maximizing your strength at lockout is a good way to increase your chances of bicep injury. Same thing on various back movements. If you do enough pulling work that stretches the bicep at the bottom, whether it's your rows or chin-ups or anything else, so again, you go all the way down on your chin-ups, you're going to strengthen your bicep in that position and get your bicep used to being under load at the stretched position. And if you do that, you're going to be more resilient against bicep tears in general. Now, the other thing that causes bicep tears is not pulling the slack out of the bar before you start. And that can happen some with touch and go deadlifts, which again, I'll cover touch and go later on the back injury thing. But usually it's because people do not reach down and pull the slack out of the bar. You guys will notice that I reset completely on every single rep. And I pull the slack out and put tension on the bar before I attempt to pull. So in other words, you should be able to hear it. Like when you're deadlifting, when you pull the slack out of the bar, you will actually hear the plates a little bit when you pull the slack out before you pull. And you need to do that before every single rep. And some people might say, well, a person's bending their arms before. Well, if you're bending your arms to reset yourself in position, that's fine, because there's no load on the biceps. What you're trying to avoid is when you actually go to pull the weight off the floor to have bend in the arm, right? So by getting tighter and pulling from the floor with tightness, with your elbows locked, with the slack pulled out of the bar before you actually try to engage and actively rip the bar off the floor, you're also going to reduce your chances of bicep tears. So, I mean, right there, if you do those two things alone, you strengthen your biceps at the bottom of your exercises, and you pull the slack out of the bar and out of your arms, but immediately before the pull each time, you will dramatically reduce your chances of a bicep injury. Dramatically. The only other final note there is going to be jerking. You guys have seen me do one rep to where I shimmied a little bit. When you see people shimmying, and I mean shimmying like you're jerking, it's not a smooth movement anymore because you're grinding on the deadlift. That also can contribute to it. And if you think about it, when you think about your bicep being stretched under load, if you think about it, the bar jerking a couple of times with a heavy weight, and think about the forces involved, that's going to dramatically increase the tension on the bicep tendon and on the biceps, right? Of course it does. Versus just a smooth pull where you just pull in one thing. Think about it as the difference between pulling with a spring versus a chain. And that's exactly what happens, because it's jerking several times. And that's how stuff gets broke, because you have sharp little amounts of additional force that are much higher amount of force than just moving it consistently will be, because of the starting and stopping and then the up and down of the bar that can happen, and the whipping in the bar at that point. So it's something you need to be aware of also, and it's just something to factor in as far as bicep tears, because that's going to be your other contributing factor. But as long as you're not doing that often and those other two things are eliminated, then that isn't going to pose as big of an injury risk. Because again, if your biceps are strong at the bottom and they're used to being stretched, if occasionally you have to grind a rep, you're going to greatly reduce the chances of that happening. Now, lower back injuries. Let's talk about that. Bouncing the bar off the floor. That's how people get hurt on their lower back. That's how you herniate disc deadlifting. Also, that up and down motion of grinding for the same reason, because again, it's bouncing on your back. If you have to jerk and hitch and there's up and down motion in the exercise, yeah, you're risking hurting your back. But the biggest factor is going to be bouncing it off the floor. And the reason for that is because you're not resetting completely. And you see guys do that because they can get more reps, right? And guys will always be like, well, if I reset, I can only do 2 reps or 3 reps with that weight, but I can do 5 or 6 or 7 if I touch and go. Well, when you really think about that, if you're able to do more reps doing a different technique, that means the muscles aren't working as hard on those reps. And if the muscles aren't working as hard, you're not gaining size and strength from it. It's a waste of time. If you really wanted to make that count, just take 20 pounds off the bar if you wanted to do higher reps. You don't need to do touch and go, because again, you're not doing more work with the muscles. You're using outside forces to create inertia, and it's allowing it to bounce off the floor. Therefore, you don't have to work as hard at the bottom, and accordingly, you don't recruit as many muscle fibers. So of course you can do more reps, because they're easier. Well, easier means less tension. Less tension equals less strength and less size. So what it does also do, though, is that it doesn't allow you to reset on each rep. It doesn't allow you to reset. And it forces you to sometimes focus a little more on the eccentric. Well, slow eccentrics on the deadlift can strain and fatigue the fibers of the lower back more. They create more DOMs. They create more micro tearing in the connective tissue. That will cause you to accumulate more soft tissue injuries in the lower back. It won't necessarily increase the chance of disc injuries, but it will certainly increase the chances of soft tissue injuries from overuse. Because again, that's not adaptative stress. Micro tearing in connective tissue from slow eccentrics increases pain and fatigue without an additional increase in hypertrophy and strength. So that's not really desirable. Again, if you want to do an eccentric-based deadlift, that's what Romanian deadlifts are invented for. You don't need to put a heavy focus on the eccentric, and the touch and go requires you to put a heavy eccentric focus to reduce the amount of bounce at the bottom. So it's kind of a catch-22, because the bounce at the bottom doesn't allow you to reset, and it can force you to pull through angles that end up damaging your disc in your lower back. You're more likely to herniate a disc. It's just how we see most back injuries happen on the deadlift, is the touch and go. So the only way to reduce the chances of injuring the disc by doing touch and go is to control the weight more on the way down, so that you can perfectly line the bar back up so that you can repeat the same bar path. And then you risk soft tissue injuries from the extra eccentric work. So here's the whole point. There's a catch-22. Either way you do it, with a touch and go, increases your risk of one type of low back injury or another. So the solution there is to not touch and go at all. The solution is to reset on every single rep, so that you have to put your feet back, and if you have to move your feet to reset, or you have to roll the bar or adjust it between every rep, then you do so, because you can pull in a perfect position each time from a dead stop. It's going to give you the most power out of the bottom. It's going to reduce your chance of injuring your lower back, both through eccentric loading or jarring it and causing disc injuries, as well as it will allow you to re-pull the slack out of the bar each time. So it will also reduce the chances of a bicep tear. And that's the beauty of it. Because you're resetting on each rep, you don't have to worry about a perfect bar path on the way down, so you don't have to control the eccentric as much, because you can reset the bar or your feet on each rep. And therefore you can focus on what matters, an injury-free, powerful, concentric rep on the deadlift. And that is how you get stronger, and that is how you do so without getting hurt. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.